Trust Network at the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative, or DSNI. And so in the greater Boston area, we actually have many community land trusts. I think as of now, we are at 5 CLTs, and we're growing. And so there's sort of been a need to kind of create a network space so that existing community land trusts and emerging community land trusts can kind of provide peer support and also advocate for policies and also kind of grapple with you know, some of the shared struggles that we have. So yeah,
I can just do the slides.
oh, that would be great.
So I want to manage the camera too.
So I guess yeah, it seems like a lot of folks here are Ujima members, and I'm just curious as to you know, what are some of the things about community land trusts that you all like are hoping to learn today? So what are some of the
How can you do it when a lot of the land was bought up and was vacant entire lots in today's dollars versus yesterday's?
Okay, is there a marker I can take notes on? Oh, down here. So would you repeat that question? How can you?
A lot of times when you're talking about land trusts, you're competing with current financial or market issues, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what is the market value of that land, and how can you have land trusts in this day and age versus, like, you know, DSNI or some early 80s, whole different landscape as far as how valuable land is currently. So, very curious.
Okay. What else? What are some other questions that people, you know, are hoping we talk about today? Yes.
I'm interested in commercial land trusts as well as
Commercial and housing. Okay. And I know that there's another workshop focused on commercial CLTs as well.
The 4th week, February 27th,
Yeah,
we'll have Tony
today's
from DSNI.
And yes, back there.
It's gonna sound so weird, but what is it?
Yeah, what is it?
No idea
What
it
is it?
I do it.
Yeah. No, that's a fundamental question that I'm hoping we can answer today. What is a community land trust? Oh, wow, it's so strange to see myself on. Yes.
How is your land trust governed?
Okay, governance. How governed?
Scattered site versus central.
Scattered site versus contiguous. Yes.
How much land is there?
How much land?
In the community, Boston, US, any stat.
Like how many land trusts are there, or
How many land trusts, how much land they have, what you know, what you don't know.
okay. CLT. Yes.
do you connect with other communities that are doing land trusts, like Cooperation Jackson, that is working with land trusts and working on cooperatives? So I guess what's the intersection of working on cooperatives and land trusts?
Well, Ujima is also a kind of a space where those things intersect, right?
Yeah. I'm so excited.
Yeah.
What are like state and municipal policies that either support or work against?
What are policies that support? Support CLT. Okay, so we probably won't get to all of these questions today, but hopefully that'll, have you coming to CLT 102. So today I kind of want to talk about sort of the fundamentals, the basics of CLTs, and I don't want to go too technical because I recognize that folks are kind of come with different and varying levels of knowledge and understanding about community land trusts. So I really want to kind of get to what are sort of the fundamental values and principles of the community land trust. And so I also want to start with an activity, if you'll bear with me. So I'm gonna read a statement here, and if you feel that that statement applies to you, I want you to stand up or raise your hand. Okay? Stand up or raise your hand if you or your family has ever worried about how you are going to pay for rent or the mortgage. So this could be housing or even, if you have commercial space. Okay, put your hands down. Stand up or raise your hand if you or someone you know has ever been displaced from their home or neighborhood. You or someone you know. Raise your hand if you believe that people deserve an affordable, safe, and decent home, no matter how much they earn. I hope that we're all on the same page. This might be the wrong meeting if you. Raise your hand if you think that residents and the people most impacted should get to make decisions about their communities. Great. Finally, raise your hand if you believe that something needs to change with regards to affordability in Boston. Okay, great. Thank you all. So it seems like there's definitely a lot of kind of common interests right here just from the activity. And, I think the exercise helps bring out some of the common threads and experiences, right? That, we're sort of strangers in this room. And so I just want to ask, while we were doing that activity, I was asking about, if you or your family has ever been worried about paying rent or your mortgage, or, if you or anyone you know has ever been displaced from your neighborhood, what were some of the things that people were thinking about? What are some either memories or feelings that came up during that activity?
Gentrification in my neighborhood right now.
Yeah.
On my very eyes. Lived on the street for 40 years, and just seeing it change in the last few years is just astounding. And where do these people think that the workers that are at all these beautiful places are going to live?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what neighborhood do you live in?
Alston. Harvard, Alston.
Yeah, yeah. Yes.
Fear. It happened when I was younger. Fear, afraid you're going to have no place to live, feeling sort of suicidal, getting really scared.
Yeah, no, that's real. The threat of displacement, it impacts us just emotionally and physically, right? And there have been a lot of studies done about sort of the health implications of displacement, right?
Or you can't pay the rent, or
or worries, or the stress.
Worried if you're living paycheck.
That's right. That's right. Yes.
I think about the pain of foreclosure, or the financial pain after losing it, or being evicted from an apartment or foreclosed upon, lasts a long time afterwards.
Yeah.
I was thinking about the kind of conflicting feelings as a homeowner. If you buy a house that's now worth 3 times, what the person who owned it before paid for it, you have to raise the rent. Or at least in my mind, I didn't buy a home to continue paying egregious amounts every month. You know what I mean? So it's kind of that conflicting, like I made this buying decision so that we can live kind of comfortably, but in order to do that, you have to raise the rent, and that makes it hard for someone else. So it's kind of how do you not become part of the problem but also not create more problems for yourself and your family.
How do you work with your kids?
Yeah, daycare ain't no joke.
Oh, girl. Oh, God, it's lost.
Right. And as the real estate market, becomes hotter and hotter, right? You're paying more for taxes and the cost of living is going up. And homes are being flipped on the speculative market. And so, other homeowners sort of feel that crunch as well. That's right. So yeah, I think a lot of people in, greater Boston and in the city of Boston feel sort of, the same concerns and some of the same fears. People are seeing their neighborhoods change and longtime neighbors being pushed out of, their neighborhood. And so, I think DSNI probably has one of the, the better known community land trusts, actually in the country. But in the last probably, I think 5 years or so, there's been more and more interest in community land trusts, I think, given sort of this housing landscape right here. And so with that, I do want to go into sort of the CLT basics. So yeah, right there. I'm gonna skip the video just for sake of time. And so what is a community land trust? That was one of the questions that was asked. I'm hoping we're gonna answer that today. So I guess the key message that I wanna highlight in us thinking about a community land trust is that it's a model of land ownership that puts people before profit. Okay. So that's sort of the fundamental principle and the fundamental value that drives community land trusts. And so how that works is a community land trust is it's a nonprofit, right, that owns and stewards land on behalf of the community and considers land as well as the structures on top as a public good and not as a commodity, right? And in today's market, right, we see places like neighborhoods like Alston, Brighton. We see neighborhoods like Chinatown, Eggleston and Dorchester, and so many more where in the traditional private market, these corporate investors are swooping in, right, and buying properties and flipping them, right, for basically to whoever can pay the highest, to the highest bidder, right? And I think what we're seeing is some of the symptoms that we talked about today, right? Displacement, stress, fear, all of that, right? And so I kind of want to break down the structure of the community land trust using the 3 words of community land trust. So if you go to the next slide, community. So we'll start with community, and then if you want to go to the next slide. The community land trust aims to represent and reflect the community. And part of how it does that is through the board structure. And so for a typical community land trust, there's a 3-part board structure. And so typically, a third of the board is made up of community land trust residents. And so that means you could be a homeowner or a renter on a community land trust home. And then the second third is made up of residents who live in the broader neighborhood. So you might live in, a neighborhood that has a community land trust, but you don't actually live on a community land trust. But what goes on in the neighborhood still impacts, right? And then the third of the 3-part board structure is made up of representatives that represent sort of a broader public interest, and that could be anyone like an elected official, a leader of a faith institution, nonprofit leaders, or a business owner as well. And so the reason for that structure is so that the interests of you know, the residents of the CLT is balanced with the interests of the broader community as well. And typically, you know, the board is elected through sort of a majority vote process from the CLT membership. And so I'm going to move on to the land portion. So land. So how does this actually work? Well, when we typically think about home ownership, right? I am a homeowner. I own my home. I own the land underneath. Well, what's different about a community land trust model is that it actually separates ownership of the land from the ownership from the structures on top. And so in this picture, this is it's a home. But when I say structures on top, it doesn't always have to be a house. It could actually be a commercial building. It could be a school. It could be an urban farm.
A trailer.
Pardon?
A trailer.
A trailer, that's right. It could really be anything, right? Any use that sits on top of land, right? So it's separating ownership of the land from ownership of the structure. And let's see. And part of how it does it, if you go to the next one, oh, that just goes straight into to the trust part. And so actually, even in Boston, we have CLTs that have uses from housing. We have a CLT called the Urban Farming Institute that actually has urban farms in Mattapan. Dudley Neighbors Inc., which is the CLT over in Dudley Square, is currently in the process of building a mixed-use commercial building as well. And so it really can serve sort of a broad spectrum of needs of the community. So if you want to go to the next slide, so trust. And so because the CLT, it holds land in trust, right, on behalf of the community, you know, it ensures that the uses of the structures on the land reflects the needs of the community, right? And it, you know, the intention is not to sell the land to maximize profit, right? And so with this sort of diagram, I just wanted to show, I know someone mentioned foreclosure too. So I wanted to walk through the example of a foreclosure, right? And so if you look at the first home, this is pre-foreclosure. The homeowner owns the land. The homeowner owns the property. And then once they fall into foreclosure, the bank takes it away, right? Because even though, you know, as someone said, you're a homeowner, we know that once you stop paying that mortgage, is that who's gonna own the home, right? Right? And I know at City Life they use the term bank tenant association, right? Because we know that even though you're a homeowner on paper, yeah, if you stop paying those payments, they're gonna take your home, right? And so post foreclosure, it's gonna be the lender that owns both the land as well as the structures on top. So in the example of a community land trust, the community owns the land underneath, and the homeowner would continue to own the land on top. And so with the land trust model, what it's trying to do is balance the risks and the benefits between individuals as well as families, right? Because right now in market rate housing, we know that the value of land, right? We're all in Ujima, right? So we understand that value is not created from the speculative market, right? Because right now, as we talked about, homes are just sold to whoever will pay the highest price. But we know that what makes a community great is not just who's going to pay the most amount of money, but it's what we invest in it. It's socially created equity and socially created value, right? And so in the private markets, all of that value and all of that equity, it goes to an individual homeowner or an individual investor, right? But with the community land trust model, and also on the flip side, right, in a downturn, you know, all the repercussions of it also falls on the individual homeowner, right? So if you fall into foreclosure, it's the individual who loses, all of that. Right? And with the land trust model, it's trying to balance sort of that risk and balance the benefit of the socially created equity, right? So that yes, the homeowner gets to accrue some wealth as well, but that it doesn't all go to the individual, right? It also goes to the community, so that if I sell my home on a community land trust, it remains affordable to the next person, right? And that's how it's, that's how it sort of remains in perpetuity. And so, yeah, that's sort of the basics. What did I have for the next slide? Oh, well, I sort of talked about this. So around, that homeowners can still, any improvements that you make on your home, you still get to retain the value of those improvements when you sell your home. But you just might not make, the market, the highest price that someone's willing to pay, right? And so you can still pass down some of the value and the wealth building element of home ownership to, to your children or your heirs. But when it's resold, it still remains affordable to the next home. So yeah.
One question, Sharon.
Yeah.
Can you, I'm having trouble following that. Can you break that down? Like, why would the homes stay affordable?
Yeah, so basically the document that governs sort of the relationship between the land and the structures on top, or, in this case, a home, it's called a ground lease. And so, so in the ground lease, there are certain deed restrictions that say when you sell your home, there's a whole sort of convoluted resale formula around, you won't capture the market value, right? But in year one, you'll capture like 0.5% of interest. And then in the second year, another half interest. And so it's actually written in the ground lease, this deed restriction that limits how much money that you can make when you resell your home. Yes.
To that point, are the ground leases different per state by state? Do you all create that in the community land trust? Like, how does that work?
There are sort of model ground leases out there, but you could take a template and then customize it to your own community land trust. And there are, if you go on online to Burlington Associates, so up in Burlington, Vermont, at the Champlain CLT, they have one of the largest CLTs in the nation. I think that they actually share template ground leases. But it really varies from CLT to CLT. And also it could vary depending on what are the uses, right? A housing CLT would differ from a commercial CLT, for example. So it is different. It can be different from each CLT to the next.
How would a house CLT be different from a commercial one?
From a commercial one? Well, the uses are different. So you could have a small business, for example, or you can have like an artist gallery or an artist space. So in our city, zoning dictates, right, what uses can operate on a piece of land. And so, but in terms of the value, right, in terms of being like the fear of having your commercial rent sort of jacked up, it would make sure that the rents are still remain affordable as well. Yeah.
So how did that house and the building get separated? Like, what's the process?
The process. Well, maybe that's actually a good question for a legal expert. Yeah. So I don't know the legal procedure of it as well.
Does the CLT buy the whole thing and then sell the house?
So that does happen sometimes. Yeah, so that does happen sometimes. So for example, at DNI, which is Dudley Neighbors Inc., you know, almost all of the homes or the home ownerships, yeah, because there are rentals as well, were built kind of from the bottom up. They were new construction. And so during the construction process, it's sort of the developer that owns it, right? And then once the home is built, they bifurcate the ownership so that the community land trust, DNI, owns the home, and then the home is sold to an income eligible home. So let's say you are a resident of Boston who is at 50% area median income. You could apply via lottery to be a homeowner for that home. Does that sort of make sense? Yeah.
Okay.
Was Joy next? Were you next, Joy?
Okay. So could you explain, I don't know if you could go back to the foreclosure, could you explain how the homeowner is protected in foreclosure, like what happens in the foreclosure process? Like can they actually fall into foreclosure, what that looks like?
Yeah, so it's being on a community land trust doesn't mean that you're 100% foolproof from foreclosure. But because there are a few protective measures. For one, in cases where you're refinancing, you actually have to get the approval of the community land trust. And so, if I am looking at sort of predatory loans, for example, the CLT actually has to approve of that loan. And also, if a bank is trying to foreclose on you, they have to notify the community land trust as well before foreclosure. And so there's sort of steps to intervention, right? And then the community land trust can kind of provide financial assistance or foreclosure prevention assistance as well, because you can't foreclose on this home without letting me know. We own the land. Yeah.
Would that be a little bit like a trailer park, I think, because the people own the trailer, but they rent the land. But of course, the trailer can be moved, the bank could take the trailer and leave the land.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good example. And I think there are actually examples of like mobile homes and community land trusts.
There's a lot of that in New Hampshire.
Pardon?
Well, there's a lot of trailer parks in New Hampshire.
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah. I mean, feel free to share examples. I know folks were wondering about, what CLTs there are nationwide. And I think, to my understanding, to address that question, there are, I think, around 270 community land trusts across the country. I'm sure it's also growing as well.
Actually, I've heard that there are 2,200 land trusts that are available to indigenous peoples, and there are about 2,200 indigenous peoples groups. I have a friend who is trying to match those up, because that's the difficulty, the legal structure and all of that stuff. So matching these trusts to the people who actually own them has been a very difficult task. Is what my friend Jenny Dedham.
I'd be curious to hear more about that.
I'll look you up.
Yeah. And also to recognize that, the way we understand, property, it's sort of, it comes from, a Western, right? And that, actually this way of living, in terms of collectively stewarding land is very common and has been around for a long, long time. And so even though community land trusts, have been around for 50 years or so, sort of that idea of, collectively stewarding land, it's been around for a long time. I know there are groups, there's a community land trust that's starting in Chelsea with Green Roots. And it's mostly made up of monolingual, immigrant women. who've been meeting for like the last 10 years. And they're like, actually the first time I heard about community land trust is when I came to the US, but I lived on a residential co-op back in, Nicaragua. And so sort of I think to us it feels foreign, and I think like it also says a lot about how we need to shift our understanding about our relationship to land, and also kind of untangling this idea about, the American dream of buying property, right? But that this way of thinking is, you can find it kind of across the globe.
I understand how this structure kind of slows down or limits the inflation of the housing or pricing. But can you talk about how it affects the systemic pricing or more larger pricing of the housing?
Could you clarify that?
Yeah, so I can see how an individual house stays more affordable, but how can this affect more?
What's the bigger impact of the community land trust? I think that's a really great question, because I think the thing that keeps coming up is like, okay, so how do you like blow this up to scale, right? Like economies of scale. And admittedly, it is really challenging. Acquiring, if you aren't given land, like D&I was basically, I think they paid like $1 per parcel of public land. But in today's market, it's so expensive to buy land, right? So it's hard to compete with kind of global capital that's pouring into Boston to buy land and housing. So there are a lot of challenges. I feel like personally, I think that it's about like, how do we shift like our mentality? How do we shift our framework, right? And that's where the organizing comes in, right? And that's where, places like, City Life and in partnership with Ujima, we're trying to kind of think about like the solidarity economy, right? And I think the community land trust is part of that ecosystem, right? Because we know that, just, 10 homes it's not going to change everything. But it's about, how are we bringing people in, and how are we, conducting education, and how are we changing when we think about our relationship to land and housing. I think that's where the bigger impact lays, right? Yeah, but I think in terms of this technical question of how to bring it to scale, I think that is something that we're grappling with. Ideally we just have completely socializing housing, right?
Let's take one.
Yeah.
Maybe
take
that.
one.
Wait, I'm sorry. Maybe because did you ask the question already?
I did not.
Oh, I just want to.
So I'm curious about timing of formation of land trust. Like you talked about, you talked about new construction, and then I can see how homeowners could get together and decide to convert, and that would provide some benefit. But your name implies that. I guess I'm asking about foreclosure. Is this a process that can help people get out of foreclosure, or is it something that has to be done
So
before that
what's
happens?
kind of great about the community land trust model is that it's very flexible. In the case of COHIF, it does have the word foreclosure in it. And I know that actually next week you're going to have Alma, who is a resident who lives in a COHIF property, come and speak. But just to give like a quick overview and history of COHIF, the way we purchased property is actually by, in partnership with kind of grassroots groups, such as, the Boston Tenant Coalition, City Life was a really crucial partner, Greater Four Corners Action Coalition, helped to identify sort of residents who are at risk or in foreclosure. And so for those residents, and that includes both tenants as well as homeowners, and for some of those homeowners who had kind of exhausted all of their measures to be able to buy back their home. So, maybe they didn't qualify for a refinancing. They didn't qualify for sort of these buyback programs. The COHIF program was sort of a last stop measure to make sure that they're able to at least stay in their homes. And so what we did was purchase those properties from the lenders. So from, Wells Fargo or Fannie Mae, so that COHIF could own the properties, and we can maintain tenancy of those existing residents, moving forward. So that's the way that COHIF acquired properties, but there's sort of a whole host of possibilities, right? I think with homeowners, there are sort of a growing number of homeowners who say, like, I'm concerned about gentrification and displacement, and what can I do? And so I've been getting questions around, like, can I put my home on a land trust as well? And so that's something that we're also thinking about as well. Right now, I think the community land trust field in Boston, it's still growing. And so I think we're just trying to identify sort of what are those pipelines to bringing homes into the community land trust. And so, yeah. And I'm happy to talk more about it if you, have more questions about the foreclosure.
I'm curious about that.
Yeah.
Answer that question.
And let's take the last question from Ron, because we're over time.
Actually, my question was, can homeowners choose to become
Yes. So there is actually a research project done by a group of Tufts graduate students that actually did a semester-long report on this question of how do you bring private home ownership into community land trust. I'm happy to send that to you if you're interested. Yeah, we can talk more about it. Yeah, so I know Mia is giving me sort of the hand signal. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Sharon. And then I know there are lots of questions that you didn't get to, and some will be covered in later weeks. Is there contact information for people to contact you?
Yeah.
Website for anyone to check out if they want more information?
So, I'll just write down my contact information here. It's very simple. Sharon@cohip.org. I actually brought some literature about the Greater Boston CLT network, and on it, it actually has a list of the different CLTs. So, depending on what neighborhood you live in, if you kind of want to get, engaged with your local CLT, that you have the contact information to do so. So, I'll just,
I'll
pass that around
to make sure everybody gets one. And while that's coming around, we can go ahead and do our report forwards for the teams that are going to meet tonight. So can someone from the time banking team talk about what you're going to meet about tonight? Don't all speak at once.
We're going to talk about outreach.
We're going to talk about outreach.
Yeah.
Excellent. What about the financial education team? Anybody here for financial education? Oh, I guess that is not. Oh, you are. Okay, I was gonna say, I guess it's not happening tonight. Right.
I can't talk for it.
True. And then what about outreach? Well, time banking is doing outreach for time banking, right? What's outreach going to talk about more specifically?
We're going to talk about getting people out to our fun workshops that are coming up, and also continuing to work on what engage looks like, and actually all of the existing members that we have, and more fun stuff.
All right, excellent. So now let's figure out where everybody will go. Who is here for time banking? Go 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Who's here for? You are here for financial education. Who is here for outreach? Okay, so it's about even. So.
The new folks should know that you're welcome to join.
And I see Sarah on Zoom, and she's for time banking. So let's say time banking stays in this room, and outreach is in the small room. And financial education, you're a duo tonight. So either the hallway or the cubicle area?
Wait, so it's Sarah and
No, it's you and John.
yeah, why don't we go back here?
Oh,
So-
well, Sarah left. Okay.
Oh, really?
Maybe she's gonna come back in
I'll
later.
check
I don't
mine.
know. Okay. All right, cool. Thank you. Thank you so much, Sharon. We're sharing. We're gonna keep it.